Hello and welcome back to another episode of Fully Booked, the Hidden Gems author podcast, in which Craig Touch and myself, Roland Hume, chat to some of the interesting figures and leading lights of this crazy industry of writing and publishing. And today we are delighted to welcome an author and book coach, Jen Braaksma, calling from, I didn't ask you where you were calling all the way from, Jen, but how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you. I'm in Ottawa, Canada.
Oh, how lovely. What's the weather like up there?
Sadly, it is snowing again. We had nice weather last week. I was hoping spring was in the air, but winter is back.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. That groundhog lied.
Yes.
Well, we're delighted to have you. Thanks so much for joining us. And of course, we wouldn't be here without the man himself, Craig Touch, the owner and founder of Hidden Gems and an author himself. How are you doing today, Craig?
Doing well, thanks, Roland, and thanks for joining us, Jen. Yeah, I'm near Toronto, so it's the same thing. You know, we had that like false spring, and thought everything was good, and then it like dumped a whole bunch more snow, and yeah, tomorrow is the first day of spring, so I'm hoping it'll just all magically change. So thanks for joining us. Yeah, you know, you're a book coach, among other things, and that is definitely what we want to talk about. But why don't you give us the quick and dirty about yourself and how you got into all this, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would argue, you say quick and dirty. I will go back to when I was 8 years old, but don't worry, it won't be every year, every decade. I love to write ever since I was a kid. This story that I wrote when I was 8, it was a Christmas story, and I thought it was just the most fantastic thing ever. And at the time, so did my parents. My mom even typed it up on one of those old-fashioned typewriters, and so I considered that I had a published work because it was typed. And then
that's sweet.
my dad put one of those excellent stickers on it, that you get from the classroom, and there was one around the house. He put it on, so award-winning publisher at age 8, or published author at age 8. That's how I viewed it, and that was the start of it all. But as I got older into high school, I would write for my high school newspaper. So my parents were a little concerned about this whole "how are you going to make a living" thing as an author, and they suggested, "You really enjoyed your time on the school paper. What about journalism?" And I thought, okay. At 18, I mean, I was certainly aware of the pitfalls of a literary career. I thought, sure, why not? Let's jump into journalism. Now, this was in the mid to late 90s. They thought that would be the financial security if they could only have seen what we know about the journalism industry today. So It turned out not to be my thing. And that's when I chose a different career path. I went into teaching. I thought high school English teacher, that was going to be great because I could at least talk about books. And I loved it. And I did that for nearly 20 years. I was in the classroom, but the whole time I was writing on the side as well, by this time I was married, I had 2 young children, and still thinking that I could teach full time and also write. So I did everything that I could on my own. And it was a struggle because as much as other people might be DIY, do it yourself, I was struggling with I was taking workshops and online courses and such, but there's still something missing. And that's when I came across the concept of a book coach. I didn't even know such a thing existed. And it's like a sports coach. A book coach is somebody who helps you one-on-one, and they work with you on your own story. And that's what I was missing. So I came across my own book coach, Jenny Nash, and she was absolutely fantastic. She was exactly what I needed for my own writing. At the time, I was working on some young adult novels. She helped me with 2 of them that are now published and out there in the world: Evangeline's Heaven and Amaranth. And as we were working together, she was starting up some book coach training, some courses to help people who were interested in book coaching. As a teacher and as an author, I thought this was absolutely such a great marriage of all of my interests. So I jumped right into her courses, into her training. And then this is when the pandemic hit. And now I'm teaching online to high school students. So it was just a black hole. Nobody had their cameras on. Nobody wanted to speak. And but I had already been thinking, I was working on my own writing getting my own books published out there, really enjoying my dabble into the book coaching world. I thought, you know what? Just throw it all in. So at the height of the pandemic, when everyone was still teaching online, that's when I bailed from the virtual classroom, and I thought, let me try this. So I went into book coaching full time, still able to do my own writing, my own schedule and such, and have over the past few years gotten to meet and work with some amazing, wonderful writers one-on-one.
That's fantastic.
Wow. Yeah, nice. So how many authors have you worked with now, like as a book coach?
So yeah, a hard question, because I don't actually keep track of specific numbers. Upwards of 100 over the years.
Wow.
But let me just preface that by saying not every author chooses to go start to finish from their outline all the way to a finished product. So some of those authors of those 100 might have chosen to end after their outline. Others might have gotten halfway through a draft and other things have come up in their life. Others have finished a draft and decided, okay, I'm going to put it away for now. So as much as I've worked with, these 100 plus whatever people, each project was its own and each author had their own end game in mind.
I think that's like an important distinction for people to understand, is that, you don't have to use a book coach to, take you through that whole process. It could be used for just the parts that you need help with. What is like the most common sort of thing that authors come to you for help with?
So I usually get the two extremes. I get someone who has a great idea and either, like me, when I found my own book coach, tried to do it on their own and wasn't really getting anywhere and needed some one-on-one guidance. So often they come with an idea and they're not sure what to do. The other end of the spectrum is when they finished a manuscript and they either don't know what to do with revisions, or maybe they already have, and they've pitched it, if they're looking for a traditional literary agent and they're not getting a lot of traction, and then they'll come to me asking about a manuscript evaluation and saying, hey, can you help me on this? So those are the two extremes that I usually get. And my process is very, very similar for both of them. Let's go back to the foundation of your idea. Let's look at what you're really trying to say. I work with fiction and memoir authors. I don't often work with nonfiction writers. So we're really looking at narratives, the structure, the characterization, the character growth and evolution. And that's very similar in a memoir as well, even if that is nonfiction. So I take them back to the fundamentals. Let's look at what your story is actually about, and let's rebuild it from there.
That's a great idea. I found the fundamentals of storytelling are something that we writers kind of overlook because we're so excited about writing a story. I mean, my writing kind of changed when I started studying like Dan Brown's story circle and the hero's journey and romancing the beats and stuff like that. And you just end up writing better stories as a result.
I think so. And it's something, there are a lot of different templates out there, if you will, or different ideas, and you have to find the right one. And I'm so, I try to convince I'm not convinced, but I try to talk to my clients. I'm going to tell you what's worked for me. I'm going to tell you what has worked for some of my other clients, but you find your own writing process. However, there are such things as bad writing out there. There are such things as bad books. You might even have seen them. They might have gotten published. Yes, absolutely. But let's try to avoid that in your case. Let's go back to those fundamentals. And if my process isn't working, let's keep working to try to find something that will work for you. But let's keep in mind what it is that people actually come to stories for. And that's about, again, we're talking fiction and memoir. We're talking about that character growth, how that character, that person has evolved throughout the story. And that's what I love to focus on with my clients.
Right. And I'm sure normally it's a very close back and forth process between yourself and the author to ensure that you're not writing the book for them. You're giving advice, but it's still staying to their voice and their experiences and what they want to write. But then there's this case that you had where you took on a project for an author that had finished their book but passed away, and so you had to work on it without their input. So how did that work?
That was a challenge. So when Chips came to me, he explained to me about his wife, Betsy, who had died a few years earlier. He is not an author himself. He had no interest in learning to write, but he had Betsy's first draft of a manuscript, a bunch of stories, anecdotes about her time as an animal welfare advocate. She would help stray animals, cats and dogs, and take in and foster pets and try to get them out for adoption. Chips was along for the ride, but it was really Betsy who was the spearhead of all of this. She wrote all of these stories, and she passed away before she could do anything with them. So Chips was looking for a book coach or an editor or someone who could help him get this story across the finish line, get it published, and get it out into the world. So as a book coach, yeah, I work one-on-one with the writer. And Chips wasn't about to do that. So he said, I don't even know whether you can help me. So I said, you know what, let me have a look at it. And it really was a first draft. And this is what I tell all of my clients, all of my writers. A first draft does not have to be anywhere close to perfect. We often look at a first draft wrong. We look at it and like, oh, it's so bad, it's so horrible, only because we're comparing it to what a finished product looks like. If we compare a first draft to what its actual purpose is, the criteria is, hey, do you have your ideas on the page? That's it. That's all. And then you have a perfect first draft, not a perfect novel, not a perfect memoir, but a perfect first draft. And that's what Betsy had. She had a great first draft, but they were anecdotes. They were stories without a thread. There was not a lot linking them, except that they all happened to be about animals that she had saved and rescued. And it was also about the animals. It wasn't so much about her as an individual. So there was a lot that I thought, okay, you know, she has such a fantastic voice. I loved her writing style, even if it was a little bit hard to parse through at first. Again, first draft, not everything has to be perfect. But I wasn't sure what that thread was going to look like to pull everything together. However, as I started reading it, like I said, I just fell in love with Betsy's voice on the page. She sounded like such a gregarious character. She was a person who sounded so in love with life. She sounded so passionate. And I kept thinking, because I'm a book coach and I deal with writers one-on-one, oh, if only I could talk to Betsy about this story. If only I could ask her, like, oh my God, that sounds hilarious. I wonder what Betsy would have thought. And the more I thought like that, the more I realized how much I was getting to know Betsy through her writing, through her stories, without actually being able to talk to her. It's true, I talked to Chips. I absolutely chatted with him about, you know, the background, the context of some of these stories, some chronology, you know, when did this story happen compared to that story. But nonetheless, I would never get a chance to talk to her. So as I'm helping edit these stories together, I came up with what was a pretty bold suggestion. I put it toward Chips and I said, okay, what if I become the link in this story? What if I take my own experiences of befriending Betsy, of getting to know your wife on the page, and I use my take, my impressions of Betsy to weave these stories together? And let's see what happens. And Chips was absolutely fantastic. He said, sure, you know what? Let's try it. And it was going to be an experiment. So I'm going to put in this effort without any idea of what was going to happen. Hence, you know, every writer ever. and I thought let's see how we can make this work so that it's not just the animals. Betsy was focused on the animals. If I had been working with her as a coach, I would have suggested to her on a second draft, hey, let's put a bit more of yourself in there. I thought I can do that for her by saying, this is how I got to know Betsy. This is how I got to know her passion. This is how I got to know who she was as an individual. I wrap my experience of working on the book, on her stories, into a narrative. And that's the book that became Befriending Betsy.
Wow. So did you use I guess, her husband as a resource as well to sort of get more insight into who she was, and I guess use him as like the proxy for her in terms of like rewrites and you know, what you worked on, and say, hey, does this sound like her? Does this sound like, am I on the right track here?
Yes, absolutely. For the context, for chatting a little bit more about her, some background information. In none of those stories was anything about how Betsy and Chips met. So, you know, just a little bit of more context and background was very helpful. But Chips was really interested in a more hands-off approach. He absolutely read through the draft, and he absolutely wanted to make sure that it was Betsy's voice, but he didn't have much interest in, you know, line editing or let's look at this. He just wanted to see, hey, is it holding together on its own? So it was a little bit more, absolutely, it was a legacy for Betsy, and I wanted to honor that. I wanted to make sure that Chips absolutely felt that we were doing Betsy justice, but I also wanted him to know that the story was about how I got to know Betsy. In other words, how other people could get to know Betsy. So it wasn't meant to be, hey, here's a husband's take on his wife and her legacy. It's, here's a writer's take, here's a reader's take on this fascinating woman, someone who didn't know her before. I thought that was actually a more powerful message to say, hey, look at this woman. You've never met her before. You don't know her. But here's what we can all learn from her. And Chips was fantastic about going along with it, about saying, you know what? Yes, let's try it in that direction. And he was taking a risk. He was taking a risk with me taking Betsy's story, and you know, I'll be forever grateful to him for that, because he gave me this opportunity, and now Betsy and I both have this story out in the world.
Oh, that's really wonderful. And it takes a lot to like trust something that's so important to you as a story to someone else.
Yes, and I was really pleased that Chips was willing to do that, but also that I felt that responsibility, but I also had to balance that off with, I want to put out a good story for the readers. I didn't want it to be how Betsy was a saint, Betsy was perfect, Betsy was like everything everybody would want to be simply because Betsy had died. I wanted it to be, hey, you know what? Wow, she really said those nasty things to her neighbor, which she did. She wrote them in her first draft. and I thought, like, oh my God, I like her even better. because I would have wanted to say that. She actually said it. I would have thought it. And so another thing that Chips was absolutely open about, it's an homage to Betsy's legacy, but it was an homage to Betsy's legacy as a real person, as a flawed human like the rest of us, who didn't always make the right choices, who felt hurt and pain when her animals died or when she wasn't able to save them, but who also got frustrated with people around her for abandoning animals, got frustrated with people around her who weren't picking up the slack and helping her with all of this, and also got frustrated with the animals themselves. Like at one point, she and Chips were taking care of 13 extra cats.
Oh my God, 13.
That's 13. Now, these were cats that weren't really adoptable. They had either been too traumatized on the streets before Betsy found them, or were too scared, or were too vicious to, you know, go into a home. So she and Chips took them on. There were challenges.
That's a lot of challenges. I've got enough problems with 2 cats.
Absolutely. One of my favorite parts of the story is where she and Chips wanted to drive to Florida, halfway across the country from Missouri to Florida. So they bought a trailer for these 13 cats, and they drove halfway across the country with these cats in tow. And remember, these are not playful domesticated, sure, but I mean, like, they weren't necessarily easy traveling companions. And yet Betsy was not going to let these cats dictate her life, but nor was she going to give up on the animals either.
Oh, that's really sweet.
Yeah, that's great. So did you also help him with the publishing process then, or did he put it out on his? Did he create like a whole KDP account, or you put it under? I noticed that you and Betsy are the co-authors.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the way that Chips found me, he had reached out to She Writes Press, an independent publisher, with Betsy's stories initially. And they had looked at it and said, we love her voice, but this story, it's not ready. And that's when he took the initiative to go out and search me out. And I have worked with She Writes Press and its sister press, Spark Press, on my other two novels. My young adult novels were through Spark Press. So I've worked with the publisher and the team at She Writes Press before. So when Chips approached me, when we had a manuscript in hand, after we'd done the work together, I then went back to Brooke at She Writes Press and I said, what do you think? And because they had seen it the first time around, they had an idea of what the story was supposed to be. And she really liked that this was a different take on a way to tell an animal welfare story through this voice of this woman. So we published through She Writes. And so Chips and I are partners on the publishing side of it. And of course, Betsy gets full credit for being the author on the book itself.
That's great. So this process, I'm sure, is a lot harder than doing the regular book coach. Is this after this experience, is that something that you would ever kind of take on again? If all of a sudden you become known as the person that can help publish books from authors that there's probably a lot of authors out there that wrote drafts and never got them published, and their family came across them and were like, I don't know what to do with this. Maybe that's a new career path.
Yeah, I would do it in a heartbeat if that's the niche that I find fantastic. In fact, it's somewhat slightly related. I also do work as a ghost writer. So I help clients when they want to write their own books, but I've also worked with people who want to have their memoirs written and they don't want to do the work themselves. So I interview them, I work with them, and I write their stories for them. And I was approached by two sisters whose mother had died years earlier, and they wanted to tell their mother's story. So a different situation. There was no manuscript, there was no draft or anything, but they just wondered, could I, as a ghostwriter, help them tell their mother's story? And so that's what I did. I interviewed the two sisters. I interviewed a whole bunch of family members and friends. And I put together, as a ghostwriter, a story about their mom's life. And that was a fantastic experience too. So working with somebody who on Ruth's story, the mom, on her story, when I couldn't talk to her, was in a very similar way working on Betsy's story, not being able to talk to her as well. So yeah, I've had a little bit more experience in that. And it's always a little bit heartbreaking to know that I've gotten to know these people in such a way and I can't ever meet them in person. But on the other hand, it's really heartwarming to talk to the people who do love these people whose stories I'm writing about, and to know that I'm helping them get these stories onto the page and out into the world.
Yeah,
That's brilliant.
That's great.
Now, do you find, because one of the things is sometimes I talk to people and, I've got an idea of what things are and they have an idea of what things are. How do you manage to bridge the gap? So what you show to them isn't going to make them, I don't know, do what my mother does, be like, oh, it didn't happen like that.
Yeah. So I start with some conversations at the beginning, and as a ghostwriter, well, actually as a book coach too, actually, I'm very clear in my own mind, and I remind them, this is your story. This is what you want. So even for the sisters that I was working with, it's your mom, you know her best. If I got something wrong, you tell me. What I will do is I'll say, okay, I'm going to explain to you why I'm making the decisions that I'm making. And I'm going to explain to you why they're the best story decisions for either the story structure or the characters or whatever. After that, if you understand why I'm choosing what I'm choosing and you still don't like it because it doesn't fit into whatever idea you have, that's entirely okay. It is your story. But I also remind them about what their end goal is. As I said, I work with a lot of memoirists, a lot of writers who either choose to self-publish or who choose to just have it for their family and friends. And there's a lot more flexibility in the type of structure and the type of narrative that you can work with if you choose to have it your own. If you want to go for either a hybrid or a more conventional publication route, you might need to fit into more conventional styles, in which case, hey, yeah, maybe you want to actually listen to me and follow my advice a little bit more closely. But otherwise, I try to remind them, I'm here not to take your voice away from you. I'm here to help you clarify and amplify your voice.
Yeah, that's really important. I find too, it's a similar thing where, sometimes somebody comes and asks for advice that, we do a consult, or they have something that they show you, and then they say they want help with it, but as soon as you start giving your feedback, they're very defensive about it, right? I think that's, in order to get the most out of a book coach or anything like this, you have to come into it with an open mind. You have to remember that you're looking for help because you need help with something. And if you're just going to reject the advice of the expert, what's the point, right? So I agree. You have to absolutely let them sort of give you the final say in the direction, but they have to be open to the fact that you're the expert, and the reason why you're telling them to do these things in a certain way is because that's most likely the best way to do it.
I think so. And that's part of what I had to learn when I was first starting out too, especially because I came from the classroom. I came from, my audience were teenagers, and they were there for a very specific purpose. And I have very specific criteria and very specific curriculum that I need to deliver in order to ensure that they're learning the skills that they need to go forward. So, coming from that environment, which is much more structured, to, people who say, well, okay, but I don't like your idea. I'm like, well, what do you mean? Of course you don't like it, but because your work isn't very good. That's why I'm telling you what you need to do here. And I can't do that. I always want to be tough love, supportive, and say, here, this is why you came to me, exactly like what you said. You've chosen to reach out for a reason. And yeah, you want to be open. Do you want to learn? And if they don't, well, they're certainly not going to come back. Every book coach has a different business model. Mine is very much on a more, I try to look at more flexibility. So either a month by month model or, certain sections. So nobody feels locked in. So if it's not the right fit, or if they've decided I can't take any more comments or feedback, then I wish them well, and I move on. They move on too. You're right. It takes all kinds, but those clients have been very few and far between. Most of the people, when they do reach out, there's a process, right? For any kind of service that you're looking for, you're going to do a little bit of research. You're going to look to see, if you go online, you're going to look to see what's out there. And then if you like somebody's website, for example, or the offerings that they have, then you might choose to reach out to them. For me, I have a call with potential clients and we just chat, and then they're going to have to make a decision. So there's a variable number of steps before where they start to think, do I really want this? Do I really want this? So in my experience, and I've been doing this for more than 6 years now as a book coach, and, even longer dealing with writers, that by the time they say, yes, let's try it, they are open to trying it. And really, that's all that I can ask. And I've been very fortunate with the people that I've worked with over the years.
Yeah.
That's quite nice, because there's a lot of self-awareness that you have to go through to be able to reach that stage. And us writers were not always the best self-awareness.
No, absolutely. But I think that that's one of the values that I bring as a book coach, is that I'm also an author. So I see both sides of the fence. I worked with a book coach, so I know what it's like on the other end, what it's like, what Jenny was able to do when she gave me feedback, and how that made me feel, and how supportive she was. And I want to do the same for my clients, and I remind them too. If a client is pushing back on a certain number of pages, and I can say, yeah, I felt the same way. The outline process that I have is it's there. Writers who know that there's pantsers, those are the people who sit down and just type whatever comes to mind, and there's no plan. And then you have the plotters who put every single detail down. They basically write their whole book before they write their book. And I always thought I was a pantser, and who cares about outlines? And I was having none of them. Outlines are for my students' essays in class, and that's it. I'm not doing that with fiction. Forget that. And then, as I said, my own book coach comes along and she says, I want you to do an outline. And I said, yeah, no. And she said, yeah. And of course I came because I wanted help. And I said, all right, tell me how to do it. And we worked through the outline process. It's very similar to the one that I use with my clients now. And oh my God, wow, that really helps. So when a client comes to me and says, I'm not so sure about your outline process, and I say, I get it. I was there. I know what you're feeling. And personally, it worked for me. I cannot guarantee it will work for you. I can tell you how many of my other clients it's worked for. So what if you give it a try? So I think that because I straddle both sides, that I know what the world is like as a writer, and I know what it's like to help writers, that I don't know, maybe there's a little bit more trust, or there's definitely empathy on my part. I get where they're coming from, and I want to do what I can to help them.
Yeah, I mean, that's good advice, because I'm definitely on the plotter side. So I would definitely be doing the same thing. And say, let's try some plotting. Okay, so when you're doing all the book coaching with authors, what do you think is most important for, during that process, for them to keep in mind? I know being open-minded, obviously, but you're typically, like, this process, I guess it's hard to say, because it depends on what they came for. If they're coming for a little, but if you're working end to end with somebody, first of all, like, how long sort of is that process? And again, I guess that's also dependent on how long it takes them to write. But what is it that the most common things that you're seeing that people need the help from you on?
Actually, I definitely work on, some technical aspects of writing, but the biggest thing actually is support and empathy and understanding, because there's so much imposter syndrome out there. There are people who feel like, I can't write, especially if they're new. If they haven't written a novel or a memoir before, where do I start? What do I do? How? I can't do this. And, given the number of books that are published out there every year, they're like, how can I be one of those? And so I think one of the most valuable things that I can offer as a book coach is the emotional support and a reminder to them that writing is hard. There are people, especially if they're not, it's not the same when I work with experienced writers, because they've been in the trenches, they understand. But I get a lot of new writers, and I love working with inexperienced writers. It's not, I love it. There's nothing wrong with that. Everybody has to start somewhere. Let me help you wherever you're at, wherever you're starting from. I'm there for you. But I remind those new writers that it's not just inspiration, that you should know it all in your head and you just type and everything's fine. It's hard work. It's frustrating. It takes time, probably longer than you want. And I'll come back to your question about the length of time in just a second. And that it's okay that it's hard. I think that it's easy for people who haven't written before. You pick up a book, you read it. It looks like it's the way it should always be. It's like, I watch a movie. Oh, like, of course, that's the way it was all put together. But then you look at the credits with the hundreds of people and the number of hours, days, weeks, the equivalent number of years, hours in hour time of just how long it takes to put something like that together. And it's 2 hours of entertainment of my time. I'm like, oh yeah, that's done. Same thing when you read a book. It looks like it's just, you open the book, you read it, therefore you open your computer and you just type. I remind them that it's not that easy. And that gives them the permission to like, okay, I got this. Let me just go one step at a time. So the emotional support is the biggest thing that I find myself offering my clients more often than not. But of course, I also do the technical, like here you're missing a narrative structure here, or you've skipped, some really important plot points here, or what happened to the point of view? You're jumping around all over the place. Did you mean to do that? What is this looking at? So for sure, there's a technical aspect. But finally, another thing too is accountability. I offer accountability to my writers. They have deadlines, they have submission dates, and I'm looking for their pages to edit. And it's like when you take a friend to the gym, right? Somebody's waiting, somebody's gonna make sure that you're there and you're doing it. And sometimes that's what people really need too. Life gets in the way. We all know how hard it is to fit writing into everything else that we need to do. So this is a way for them to put their writing forward, and I can help with that. And what that help looks like, yes, for some people, my outline process is usually like a 4-week package with assignments, quote unquote, assignments, if you will, every week. But once they get started on their first draft, it could take 6 to 8 months. But you're absolutely right. It depends on how much time they have to write. They may not. And I've been working with some writers longer than that. And some writers, I have an accelerated program too, where, they submit pages to me on a much more regular basis to get through, because they have more time to write. Honestly, I just try to work with what's going to be best for each individual. And that's the value that I have found as a book coach working one-on-one. Then, back in my teaching days, even when I was teaching creative writing to my high school students, I have 30 kids in a classroom and they have to finish their assignments, and I need to get them marked and get their grades in at a certain time. Whereas when it's one-on-one with an individual, okay, what's your schedule like? Like, you're moving. Okay, why don't we put everything on pause for the next 3 weeks or 4 weeks? You come back to me when you're ready, and we pick it up again. So that kind of flexibility, I think, is often helpful to keep writers motivated to keep going.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think accountability is probably one of the most important things, especially for new writers. And, that whole idea, we've talked about this before, where, you work from home as an author a lot of the time, right? Which means the distractions in your house are what they are for everybody, but also this idea that sometimes people in your family or that you live with have of, well, you're not really, you're writing your book, come do this other thing, right? Like those distractions are kind of built into your life, and people don't get them when they're not a writer themselves, right? That takes you right out of the process.
Absolutely. In fact, I've been doing this for a long time now. Like even before I switched to book coaching, I was still doing my own writing, right? Even as a teacher, I was working on it, and my own family would sometimes forget. I would close myself off. A room of one's own, that would be me. My door is closed, but my family would still walk in and like, what is happening here?
Yep.
And even at one point during the pandemic, when my husband was now working at home, and he walked into my little corner of the house, my home office, and I said, would you, like, I don't walk into your office when you're at work. Why are you doing this to me now? He's like, oh, that's a good point. You're right. I'll hold off on my questions until you're done your day, dear. My apologies. So, but it was just so natural.
That went as well as it can be expected.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. It was very, very nice of him. But it wasn't even a thought, because, hey, I'm home. I can just ask Jen a question. And
Exactly.
And so I think as writers, especially for people who have a lot of family responsibility in the home, it's hard to create those boundaries and to keep them. But sometimes you need those hard conversations with your family to say, could you please? And and go from there. We came up with, when I was writing, I was like, Tuesday nights were my writing night. Like I would come home from school, help the kids with their homework, and then we would all get dinner. And then after that, like, I'm out. I'm not around. You can put the kids to bed. It's not on me anymore. And like, again, it wasn't so much that my husband was ignorant of it. I hadn't asked. I needed to say, hey, here's what I need. And and those conversations were very beneficial to helping me get where I wanted to be as a writer. And now that I've established myself as a book coach and I work from home and all the rest of that, it's no longer an issue in my house. But I have that experience. I can help remind my clients about that too. Like, back to the whole, I've been there, I understand.
Yeah. So when you're doing the book coach and somebody is coming and they haven't necessarily published before, are you helping them with marketing? Are you helping them with sort of, maybe, I don't know, the realities of publishing, what they can expect? Most authors, a lot of people write a book and think, oh, I'm going to make $1 million with my book, and others are more realistic about it. Do you have to help set those expectations to people? A lot of authors make very little from their books. Maybe it's a passion project. They just want to get it out there. They just want to say they have a book written. They just want to tell their story, and it's okay to not make money. And others are doing it specifically to try to earn a living. But even among them, that's not a slam dunk. So are you finding that you set that expectation a lot with authors?
Yes, for that very reason. I have worked with authors along that whole spectrum, from those who just want that passion project for their family to those who are trying to make a career of it. And as I said, I love working with authors at any stage of their career. But that's one of the first conversations we have, like, even before they choose to sign up on to work with me. What are your publishing goals? And then a lot of them may not know, they may not understand. If they're not in the publishing world or the writing world, they may not have any idea of what that industry looks like. So I will talk to them about what self-publishing might look like, what hybrid publishing might look like, what traditional publishing might look like. But I don't want them to feel so constrained by that potential goal. I say, look, there are really in my opinion, there are really two parts of the whole writing process. There's the actual writing, let's get the book into a great manuscript shape. And then there's the publishing / marketing / publicity, right? And those take very different skills. So I tell them, yes, I want them to be aware of the challenges and difficulties, but I also don't want to be a dream crusher before they even get their manuscript finished. So I present the concepts and I say, let's put those aside. You have an idea. Now, let's write the best book that you can write. I will help you with that. And then once you have a manuscript that you are really pleased with, now let's revisit it. And at that point, I will help them only to a certain point. My job is to help them with the manuscript. There may be other book coaches who help them beyond that step. I'm happy to give them a little bit of, guidance. Hey, what if this? Try this. Maybe contact these people if I happen to know someone who might fit. But otherwise, no. Let me just help you write the best book you can.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to set those expectations up front, regardless of how much work you're going into it, because you don't want people to, think that they're signing up with you as a guarantee of success, right? Like, you don't want them to be like, well, I spent all this money on you, and I went and sold my book, and I sold 10 copies, and I didn't make back my.
I make it clear before anybody signs up with me that I make no promises of any kind of publication guarantee. My only guarantee is that I will help you write the best book you can. That's it. That's all. Everything else is out of my control, and often out of theirs too, depending on the marketplace and depending on the direction that they choose and what they want with it. It's a hard lesson, if you don't know anything about the business and you're coming into it and you think, I can be the next fill in the blank of the best selling author. And sure, maybe they can be, but I'm going to be clear that I'm not promising that. I'm going to help them write the best book that they can.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're running up to the top of the hour. So before you wrap things up, maybe you could like distill into 3 points some like blunt truths that authors should hear if they want to get their book accomplished, like you are so good at helping them, coaching them with.
Okay, patience.
Yep.
Patience. It's a glacial industry. What seems to be fast-paced everywhere else seems to go much slower in the publishing industry. But so again, that's a matter of expectations, right? Moderating your expectations. So maybe that would be number 2, is moderating your expectations. So have patience, moderate your expectations, and then you're going to really have to dig deep for some resilience. It's a tough world out there. It's a tough publishing marketplace. That doesn't mean you give up on your dreams. That just means that you may certainly get a lot of no's or very few sales before you get to where you want to go. So, you know, look at it as it's a long game. So just keep at it, keep your resilience, and keep the faith.
Good advice. Definitely.
Right. So now we are wrapping this up. I was going to ask, can you let everyone who's listening or watching on YouTube know where they can find out more about you, more about the services you offer, and everything like that?
Yeah, my website's the best place to go. It's jenbraaksma.com. It has information about my services, ghostwriting, as well as book coaching, access information to both my young adult novels plus Befriending Betsy. It's all there, jenbraaksma.com.
Fantastic. Well, we will make sure to pop a link to that down in the description down below. So if you have enjoyed everything Jen has shared with us today, make sure you scroll down there, click on that link, and check out our website. And while you're down there, you will notice that big empty comment section. So make sure you leave Jen a comment and let her know how much you appreciated everything she shared with us today. And while you're down there, you should also hit that subscribe button. You should give that like button a smash, as the kids say. And there's also that bell icon, so you'll get notified every time there is a new episode of Fully Booked. And of course, there will be a brand new episode of Fully Booked coming out next week. So until then, cheerio.